like to introduce Jan Cole as one of the new co-chairs of the Diversity Committee. Jay Fulton is the other co-chair. He's a chaplain from Frankfurt. So we're very happy that they're going to be sort of taking over and guiding the committee through the next year. And if you have suggestions for future learning lunches, I know they would be very glad to have those suggestions. Here's our speaker. Elise Tremaine is one of our chaplains in our Corbin office. We're so happy that she came here today to present. And she's originally from Brazil. Recently finished her CEP training at Norton Healthcare in Louisville, and then began with us. And I'll turn it over to Elise.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll be talking today about spiritual diversity. And I don't just mean different religions, because when you hear spiritual diversity, I think automatically we think about different faiths and religions. And I think somebody had told me recently, well, I don't see a lot of spiritual diversity in my office because all of our patients are Christian. But, you know, if you really look at just within Christianity itself, there's a lot of diversity. Think about all the different denominations and even different churches within that denomination. And then you look inside any one particular church, whatever denomination it is, and you see a lot of differences in the way that people relate to God or explain God or think about God, understand God. So we'll be talking about those kinds of differences and kind of what's behind the differences. This seminar is not about what different traditions and religions and denominations believe. We'll get into that, about the differences in belief. But that's not really what this is intended for. We're going to look a little bit behind what is behind our beliefs. How do we come to believe that way and worship that way in the first place? And we're talking here about personal theology. Is that meaning-making frame, basically how you explain life, how you explain God and God's relationship to you or to life, God's role in the world, right? And we all have a theology, whether you have thought about your theology a whole lot and you understand how you came up with that theology or not. It's those assumptions and beliefs that are mostly had unconsciously that we may not even know they're there until we're confronted with the circumstance, and then it comes out. And sometimes that's called functional theologies, when you may or may not have thought a lot about what you believe, say about miracles. And then you come to a situation where you need a miracle, then you really find out what you believe about miracles. It comes out in how you think about it, how you pray, how you talk about what you're feeling. So this is more, I'm not going to go very deep into theology, functional theology or anything like that. This is all just to say this seminar is more concerned about this functional theology, how our assumptions and our beliefs come out in everyday life. And it's coming from the starting point that theology is autobiographical. When we form our theology, we don't form that in a vacuum. We are not unbiased, objective about it. It comes out of our personality, our temperament, our life experiences, what is going on around us. When we're trying to make sense of life, we have had all these experiences growing up, and we select those experiences that most have an impact on us or resonate with us. And so it's got a lot more to do with ourselves than we may even realize. And that's where this author that I've been studying is coming from. His name is W. Paul Jones, and I have a couple of his books here. If y'all want to look at them, I might pass them around. And he wrote Theological Worlds, Understanding the Alternative Rhythms of Christian Belief and Worlds Within the Congregations. Just a little background about him. He used to be a professor of philosophical theology at Yale, in Princeton, in St. Paul's Theological Seminary before he became a monk. And an ordained priest, I believe, and now he's sort of a part-time hermit and part-time activist. Is an interesting character, but I have really enjoyed studying his books, and that's what I'm basing this seminar on. What he calls theological worlds, and I'm calling it your spiritual orientation, because it's a little easier to understand, I think, what he's talking about. So what is this coming from? He has done about 10 years of research with Protestant students and clergy. So this is what his research has really concentrated on, is Christian belief. Now, he says most of his research can also be applicable to members of different faiths. And you can, I think, see how that would be true as we go on with the seminar today. But I will also concentrate on Christianity here today, because that's what his research focuses on, and that's also where most of our patients, I think, find themselves in Kentucky. But we can talk some about different faiths too as we go along. So he has done a lot of research with this with Protestant Christians, asking them about how they conceptualize God and faith and all of that. And he has found that most people tend to express their faith in 5 different main ways. Dominant groups that he calls alternative viable clusters of faith. And he's calling them also theological worlds. What it is different clusters, similarities in how people conceptualize God in life. They're groups that share dominant feelings that result in expressed belief. And that'll become easier to understand as we go along. But it's basically, how do we describe God, how we see life, how we see the basic human problem, what is wrong with the world, what salvation would be like. That's what he's talking about. There are 5 alternative ways of looking at that. And they are not necessarily competing ways of looking at God in life. They are alternative, meaning there's not a progression. One is not better than the other. There's not one way that's more evolved or anything like that. It's just different orientations, how people understand it differently. And he's very quick to point out also that there is biblical evidence and support for any of those ways of looking at faith, any of those 5 groups in the Bible. And we could have a whole seminar on that, so we're not going to go too much into that. But that's one thing that he says, that there's not any reason for one to be over the other. They're just very different ways of looking at the same thing. And he says there's a rhythm between the basic need, how we understand what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with humankind, or the primal yearning, he calls it obsessio, and resolution, how we resolve that primal yearning that he calls epiphania, or you could call it salvation, how that is demonstrated in people's lives. I have this pictures here on the screen because he, which I thought was really interesting, that he says that there was actually a correlation between one person's spiritual orientation of their theological world and the kind of works of arts that they're drawn to. And it's a really interesting metaphor too, because he's saying these different theological worlds, it's like art appreciation. Nobody, not everybody likes the same thing in art. Not everybody's drawn to the same thing. What I may think is beautiful, you may not think it's beautiful. So, I don't know, maybe just take a moment and look at these pictures and see which one you're attracted to, and see if it really matches up with your world or not. That would be an interesting experiment. But he mentioned a few artists in each category, so I just picked a picture from each one. This one, what we have on the screen, is an El Greco picture. And you can see how the buildings are sort of twisting upwards, and the intent here is to show objects that are in and out of this world. They're in this world, but they're not really part of this world. They have sort of this otherworldly characteristic. And that sort of characterizes this world that is coming from a starting point of feeling separated in and out and not out of this world. So here's how people in this world understand life. The human problem then is isolation. or separation. Or you might hear them talking about how we're all separated from God, or we're all separated from each other. You might hear them talking about how the problem is that we live in this illusion that we're all separated from other people. It has a lot to do with just feeling separated, of feeling isolated. And feeling that the cosmos is so overwhelming. There's a sense of abandonment inside the cosmos, understanding that life is too big and we are just a speck. We are so small. We are, just a little piece in this really big picture. It's a yearning for harmony in all things and of all people. Knowing that life is a gift, but it's also arbitrary. Whatever it is could just as simply not be. And people in this world are really sensitive to that. That, just as well, you could have been born into a different country, or another country could have done something before the U.S. did, or whatever way you may put that into it. You could have been born into a different family. It's just arbitrary, and it's just so much mystery, and focusing on that mystery. And a lot of people in this world, or in this orientation, do spend a lot of time pondering and watching and thinking about the mystery of life. Not necessarily, but it's very possible that, very likely that they do, that little things come into their mind and they just are amazed and wondering about the mystery of life. Sensing that one was made to belong to something or someone, but not knowing exactly what they're made to belong to, and feeling like we just don't belong. It's like everything may be going well, and you're going through the motions, and everything is working all right, and all of a sudden you're hit with that thought, why am I doing this? What meaning does this all have? And just stopping in your tracks and just thinking about the mystery of it all. They are very ecologically sensitive and believe that death is part of life's rhythm, and that's all kind of part of that yearning for harmony. Sympathetic to Eastern thought and the unity of religions in general. And they may overlook destructive problems as insignificant because they're concerned with the otherworldly stuff. So what are some spiritual needs and resources? The essential question for people in this world is, who am I in the midst of all of this? The general feeling is longing for harmony, longing for home, longing for someone. And it's like feeling like an orphan, intending to feel alone. Sin, for these folks, means taking one's relation for granted. Again, that call for harmony. For as a spiritual person, they need gentle invitation. They really bloom in sacramental worship because of the sacredness that it brings to everyday things. They like prayer as contemplation, and they may really benefit from moments alone and in quiet silence, intentional silence. Interested in the poetic, the metaphoric, and the symbolic. Could become individualistic because they are so much into the thinking about the other world. And resolution or salvation for them emphasizes reunion, being special to someone, belonging. And it may come out from understanding life as a gift. If they're living in the resolution side of this other world, and they are feeling life as a gift and the mystery of life, and they're feeling like they belong somewhere here or somewhere else. Like for some, it focuses on the vantage point of another place, like heaven. For others, it's a unifying experience on earth with other people or even with God. And that can become an expression or a metaphor for this reunion. We had a patient in Corbin who told me one time that she thought that dying, she thought it would be like so much love just soaking into her bones and taking her home. You know, just this wonderful metaphor for reunion, finally being home. And a correction there, I didn't mean to write resolution images. Those are more human dilemma images of false separation and illusion. What I meant to write was resolution leads to feeling of harmony. Let me find myself. Leads to feeling of coming home in harmony. And the comforting words at funeral, of course, that begs the question who the funeral is for. And some, you might not say that to their brother because their brother may be in another world and not be comforted by that at all. But this is what this person would like to have said about them at their funeral, basically, would be that they're home at last. And a point here to say when I'm talking about the different worlds is that in a family you can have people with different worlds, even though they grew up in the same house and have gone to the same church, and that's very possible. And what he talks about is that in a lot of times we'll experience different worlds, we'll visit them, but at the end of the day we always come back to that dominant world for us. For instance, and one way you can think about this, I think, is to think about the different ways that Christians explain who Jesus is to them. You hear some people say he's a savior. You hear some people say Messiah, teacher, fill in the blank, friend, I don't know. But, and they may explain Jesus in all those different ways to them, but there's one way that's really the most dominant for them. At the end of the day is what really matters, or what really heals them. And this is sort of what he's talking about. And for these folks, Jesus would be the one who would tear off the veil of separation and reunite them with God, basically. I started to think about music and different ways that these worlds are expressed out there, and I started thinking about contemporary Christian artists, and it was really interesting for me because when I started to think about what music would describe this world, I started to see that these artists, most of the music that they record do tend to describe one particular theological world. So I thought of Michael W. Smith for this one. You may think about hymns that describe it, or other popular music, or even Broadway shows